And now I'm going to use this tool over here, the marker tool. And the marker tool has a number of functions. It's sort of a jack of all trades for Sketchpad 5. And what I'm going to do is select that, and then I'm going to click on this point, the vertex of the angle, and I'm going to drag inward towards the angle itself. And let's watch what happens. So click and drag, and we have ourselves this angle marker. And if I drag this point, we see that the angle marker moves as well. So here we have an example of a new.
Welcome to GoToTraining, online training made easy. There are 25 other callers on the call.
Another nice thing about having this angle marker here is that I can then select it, go to the Measure menu, and choose Angle, and that measures my angle for me. Now, one thing about Sketchpad 4, which I always found a little bit problematic, was that when I dragged my angle, and let's watch here, I can get to 180 degrees, but then rather than continuing past 180, it goes back the other direction from 180 back to 0. And I often want an angle that goes from 0 to 360, for instance, when I'm looking at circles. Well, with the marker tool here and this angle marker here for my angle, that's really easy to do. If I select my angle marker and I go to Edit and I choose the properties of that angle marker, I see here that if I click on the Marker tab, I can change my angle definition, and I'm going to make it counterclockwise. And I'll click OK. And now when I drag point I, watch what happens. We see that the angle goes all the way from 0 to 360, or as close as I can get it to appear by dragging that point. So this is something really nice and new. And I mentioned that I might want to do this in the context of looking at the degrees in a circle. So let's put a circle here into the sketch. So I'll select the compass tool, and then I'll make my circle go from point H. So I'll click on H, and then I'll drag till I get to point G. So now I have a circle with a radius of GH. Now I would also like the point I to sit on the circle itself. And here's one nice thing which it's been available for a while now. Sketchpad 4 had this, but it's a nice thing to know how to do. If I want point I to only be able to move along this circle, I don't have to build a new point and reconstruct this entire construction. I can simply select point I can select the circle, and then go to the Edit menu and choose Merge Point to Circle, and whoosh, there it goes. Point I goes right to the circle, and it is now attached to that circle. If I want to remove that point, by the way, I can simply select that point, go to Edit, and choose Split Point from Circle, and it's there removed. So I'd like to show you one other nice thing with angles, and to do that I'm going to delete point I, which will also delete my angle. And what I'd like to look at now are right angles. So what I'm going to do is construct a line through point H that's perpendicular to GH. So I'll select H, I'll select my segment, I'll go to Construct, and I'll choose Perpendicular Line. So here I have my line, and I'm now going to use the marker tool to add an angle marker. So I'll click on point H and I'll drag in towards the angle. And notice that Sketchpad turned this angle marker into a right angle marker. That's because I actually constructed this to be a right angle, so Sketchpad is making this nice for me and showing me the traditional right angle marker. One last thing that I'd like to show you here is what happens if I replace this line with a segment. to make another radius of the circle that's perpendicular to GH. So to do that, I'll click on my segment tool, and I'll now draw my line from H to the place where the line intersects the circle. That's here. And when I do, Sketchpad does something nice, which Sketchpad 4 didn't do. And that is that when I draw a segment over a line, it dashes the line so that I can more easily see that segment. And this comes up time and time again whenever you're making the construction, whether it's a parallelogram or a square or a rectangle. We're always making lines first and then replacing those lines with segments. So being able to see those segments really clearly when you draw those over the lines is a really nice new feature of Sketchpad 5. One other thing I should mention here is if you're looking at this sketch and you're finding it really easy to see these points and these segments, well, one of the reasons is that they're nice and big. And Sketchpad 4, they weren't so big. If I go to display and I choose point style, for instance, I can choose small. And look at that tiny little point over there. That's the way that Sketchpad 4 used to make its points, which, at least for me in my middle age, is not a very good way to see points. And when I've been in classrooms and we were projecting this on whiteboard and smartboards, that was not a good way of seeing them. So points now can be much bigger. Aside from the style I've been showing you here, which is medium, we can also make a point nice and large. And we can also make our segments and other geometric objects. We can make them here super thick, or we might find a reason we want them to be super thin. So a lot of new ways of being able to display your objects. And once you begin to start using these larger sizes, I don't think you're going to go back to the smaller size for points. So let me pause here and see if there are any questions. I also realized that after these questions, I'm going to take a poll because I forgot to do that when we started.
So we do have a great question from Debbie, who asked, how would the angle marker tool, how would the angle marker tool work if there were more than one angle at a vertex?
Good question. So let's look at that. So let me put a line here, and let's make more than one angle at a vertex. So remember I said about dragging in towards the angle. If I do that here, I can make an angle there. And let's see if I do that here, if that works, and here. And now that I have these three angles, I might want to distinguish one from another. So one thing I could do is select one, and I could change the color of them so I could make those easier to see. I could do the same here and maybe make that blue. Another thing I can do with angles like this is if I've made an angle mark and then I click on it with my marker tool, I can change its appearance from seeing one arc all the way up to 4 and then back to 1. So there are several ways that I can use this tool to distinguish one angle from another.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions right now, so I think you can keep moving forward. And again, just a reminder to everyone, if you have a question, just ask it in the chat panel, and we'll either answer it directly in the panel or ask Daniel so he can show everybody.
Okay, so in my excitement to get started, I really forgot to get some information about all of you who are out there tonight to find out your experience using Sketchpad. So I'm going to conduct 2 quick polls just to get a sense of who it is who's out in the audience. And the first question for tonight will be, what version of Sketchpad do you use? So if you can just quickly respond to that. Okay. I am going to close the poll because it looks like we are just about at 100%. And wow, tonight's audience looks like we're pretty heavy Sketchpad 5 users. So that's good. You're getting to see a lot of the new features. And my second question for tonight asks you about your experience level using Sketchpad. Okay, so it looks pretty evenly split. Number of you use it regularly to demo and for hands-on activities. So I think there will be something here for everybody tonight of all different experience levels. So thank you for letting us know. And now let's continue on with some of our new features. And what I'm going to be looking at next is some of the features relating to that new feature that I called hot text. And I'm going to do that in the context of isosceles triangles. So to make an isosceles triangle, I start with a circle, and then the usual method is to then make a triangle where two sides of the triangle are radii of the circle, and since all radii are equal, that guarantees me that my triangle will have at least two congruent sides. Now I could make that triangle using the segment tool. However, I'm going to show you a new way to do it using this tool here, which is a new tool, which is the Polygon Tool. And if I click and hold on that, we see that there are some varieties of polygons I can construct. I can make one with just the interior and the vertices. I can make one with the interior and the edges, or one with just the edges. So why don't I make one with both the interior and the edges? So I'll choose that, and then I'll click on my center point, the point that controls the size of the circle, the radius point that's on the circumference. And notice now when I move to create this third point, I get my triangle. And to complete the triangle, I can just click back on the center, the point that I started with, and there's my triangle. And this works for polygons with any number of vertices. For those of you who have remembered the old way of making polygons, where you first used the segment tool, and then you selected all the vertices, and then you went to the construct menu and chose construct polygon interior, this is a far easier way to do it. So love that new Polygon tool. So here we have our isosceles triangle, and just to check, yep, it stays isosceles because we constructed it to be. And now imagine that I'm a student and I would like to say something about why I think this is isosceles. So I'd like to be able to communicate that to my class, that very important Common Core practice standard. So I will choose the text tool and I will start typing. So I think, and with Sketchpad 4, what I would do next is I would come up here to my panel and I would look for that triangle symbol, and then I would type maybe ABC, and then I would have to come back over here and label the vertices of my triangle. So I could do it, but kind of a pain in the neck. So all right, delete. Let's do it another way. So I think I will now just move my mouse right over here onto the triangle itself. And when I do, notice that this plus sign appears inside that green circle. Well, if I click, watch what happens. Sketchpad labels my triangle, ABC, automatically, and it adds that label directly to my text. How great is that? Really nice. So I think ABC is isosceles because, okay, now I want to add some more mathematical labels to my caption. Let's see, I think it's isosceles because AB, so I'll move over AB. AB and CA are radii of, well, the radii of the circle, so let's click on the circle. Ooh, there we go. So I think ABC is isosceles because AB and CA are radii of circle AB. Well, that's really nice. If I'm the person reading this and I'm a student who's getting used to the idea of reading mathematical notation, every time I read one of these labels like ABC and AB and CA, I've got to look over here and find it. Well, with hot text, we've added another way of making that easier to do. If I move my mouse directly over ABC, it lights up, and when I click on it and hold, the object to which it refers, which is that triangle, flashes. Same thing happens with AB, CA, and the circle itself. So it provides a nice link between the mathematical notation and the geometric representation. So let's type a little more text. Well, what else can we say? I also think that, and now I'd like to say something about the angles, the two angles that are equal, ABC and ACB. But I haven't really marked those angles, so is there anything I can do? Well, what I can do is remember what I did with the marker tool. When I wanted to mark an angle, I clicked on the vertex of the angle and then dragged inward. So let's try that here. Even though I'm not on the marker tool, let's see what happens. So I'll click on point B and drag. So watch that. We got both the angle name into the caption and we actually marked the angle. And I think I clicked twice, so we have two arcs. So I think that angle CBA and, let's add this other angle, ACB, are congruent. So there we have a nice way of being able to write our text and simultaneously add the angle marks to our caption. Notice here that if I click on these angle marks with the marker tool, I can change the number of arcs that appear from 1 to 4 and back to 1. Sketchpad is not going to be smart enough here, and I think that's a really good thing that we're not making it smart enough to automatically say, oh, I know these two angles are equal, I'll put equal angle marks for you. No, that's the work of the student. The only place where Sketchpad makes that assumption, and it's because the students build it in, is when they construct right angles. Other than that, it's up to the student to decide how many of those arcs to show for their angle marker. One other thing that's really nice is if I decide afterward to change a label, if I want point C to become point, well, I don't know, point I, and I change C to I, all of my text is automatically changed with it. So this is some of the new features of hot text, and I'm going to pause here, and when we continue, I'll show you some more features.
Okay, so someone had a question about how you brought the text palette up, and I think both Andres and I answered that you can do show text palette from the display menu, but also did it come up automatically when you started working with text?
Right, it comes up automatically once I, let me see, I'll close it here and I'll go back to the text tool and I'll create myself a text box, and we see that the text panel came up automatically.
Great. And I didn't see any other questions, but we did have a note from Kathy that she likes, I think she's talking about the use of the hot text for the constructions projects that she does every year with her 7th graders. So this would be a neat way for students to actually explain what they've done in a construction.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad that you're using it, Kathy.
Okay, and I don't see any other questions, so I think you can go on. Oh, I'm just going to remind you, Daniel, about when you're speaking and dragging or using a menu, you get a bit of a warble.
I'm trying.
I know, you're doing a great job. Just a gentle reminder.
Okay, thank you. So a few more things to say about hot text, because it really is a cool feature. I'd like to show you an example that comes up all the time with Sketchpad. In fact, somebody just posted this sketch, I think, onto the Sketch Exchange on our website a few days ago. And that's that question of how can we use Sketchpad to explore the sum of the angles in a triangle. So I've made myself a triangle here, ABC. And it's a triangle that I can drag any vertex, and there's nothing special about the triangle. And we see these angle measurements change, and we want to explore what is the sum of the three angles. So traditionally, we choose the calculator, which, by the way, is now in our new number menu. There wasn't a number menu in Sketchpad 4. So I chose number, calculate. And with Sketchpad, we don't actually type these specific numbers into the calculator because that would only give us the sum of the angles for one triangle. Instead, we back-click on the actual measurements themselves, one by one. And by doing this, here we go, we see what happens not just for one triangle, but for any triangle. So let's watch what happens when I drag point A, for example. So there's lots happening over here. These angle measurements are changing. But this isn't. That's staying 180. And for us as teachers, that's really cool. There's a measurement that's not changing. Look at that. But for students, when they look at this, somehow they don't find it quite as interesting as I always thought they would. And one of the workshops I did recently here in New York, when we were doing this, one of the teachers pointed out a reason that I thought really made a lot of sense. And that is that this statement here produced by the calculator, because it has all this mathematical notation here with measurement of ABC, measurement of CAB, it doesn't look like there's anything dynamic about that. It just looks like it's something that we just typed out, and that this 180, it's not really depending on these numbers, it's just the static statement. So we began to think if there was any way to make this be a little more dynamic and something that would really cause students to say, hey, maybe there is something going on. And the idea came up to use hot text. So let's try that. I'll create a new caption. And this time, to explore this, I'll click directly on these measurements themselves to add them to a caption. So I'll click here. That adds it to my caption. Then I'll click plus, and now I'll click on the next measurement, plus this measurement, and okay, where's my equal sign? And then I'll click on 180. So I haven't done any calculations. Those were all done here. But now I have this new statement, and watch what happens when I drag point A, for example. Well, now this statement, which contains 180, has 3 of these measurements included right in it, and these change as I drag point A. So it makes it a little more plausible, I think, for students to recognize that this statement here is undergoing change as I drag A. Now, this really wasn't a calculation. The calculation happened there, but nonetheless, I think this is an important new way of being able to use hot text to be able to explore, I would say, a construction that probably every geometry teacher uses with Sketchpad all the time. And one other thing I'd like to show you with hot text is its ability to be able to not only to enter things like measurements and labels into text, but to also be able to add action buttons into text. So let's imagine that I have this triangle and I'd like to animate it so I can explore it without having to drag the points myself. So I'll select the triangle and I'll go to the Edit menu and I'll make an Animate button. So here's my Animate button, and it's called Animate Objects. And let's change its name. Let's just call it Animate. Okay, so there's my button. And if I press it, it animates my triangle. And what I'd like to do is, imagine I'm a student, or you might be doing this as a teacher to make a presentation. I don't want to have these buttons be somewhere off on the side of my screen and have to say, now go press the Animate button, now go do this. I just want to be able to write some text, like this text here, where I can include that button right here in the caption. So let's start by deleting this word animate. And now I'm going to use my old hot text trick of moving directly over, in this case, the button. And I'll click. And there, I've added this button into my text. And just to make it stand out, because you'll notice if I click off of that you wouldn't necessarily know that there's something embedded here. One thing I could do is I'll select that word, and let's use my convention of how I would see a link on the web, a hot text link on the web. I'll underline it, and let's change its color. So now, as I animate the triangle, and if I click animate, there, that animates my triangle. And if I click again, it stops. And I don't really need this button anymore. I mean, I need it in the sense I don't want to delete it, but I don't need to see it. So I can select it and hide that button. So now I can use this technique to be able to write about my construction and allow whoever the reader is, whether it's my students or if a student creating this for other students, for them to be able to explore the interactivity of my sketch through this paragraph that I've written here. So I'll stop again and see if there are any questions.
Let's see. I have not seen any new questions. I will say, I said this in the chat panel, it looks a little jumpy on our screens, or at least on my screen, but in reality, the animation and dragging the triangle and so forth happens smoothly. It's just the go-to training software that kind of slows things down. And that is a really cool tip about, I didn't know you could integrate a button like that with hot text, so I just learned that. So thanks, Daniel. And I don't, oh, and someone said they've closed other programs and that makes it run more smoothly, so maybe I should try that. Anyhow, I don't see any other questions, so I think keep going.
Okay. Now I'm going to change topics a little bit, and I'm going to look at some of the new features with Sketchpad 5 in terms of what we can do with pictures. Now Sketchpad 4 and 3, and all versions of Sketchpad have been really good at being able to have students do transformations. You can reflect, rotate, translate, dilate any geometric object. But you were never able to do that with pictures. And that was something that when we started thinking about Sketchpad 5, realized that that would be a really nice new feature to add. So to look at that, we have this picture here of the Eiffel Tower. And what I'd like to do is explore its symmetry. And to do that, basically what I'd like to do is to be able to take half of the Eiffel Tower and reflect that half to see if what I get looks like this whole Eiffel Tower. And I actually saw the Eiffel Tower in person 2 months ago. My first thought about it was not how beautiful it was, but wow, that was that Sketchpad activity. So kind of Sketchpad travels with you everywhere, it seems. So here, in this case, what I'd like to be able to do is somehow crop this picture so that I just get half of it. And no, I'm not going to have to go use some image editing program. I'm not going to have to use Photoshop. We can actually use Sketchpad to do the cropping for us. So what I'm going to do is go back to my Polygon tool, and I'm just going to draw a polygon that intersects the Eiffel Tower. So here we have some random polygon, and what I'd like to do is use this to crop the portion of the Eiffel Tower that's visible. So I'm going to select the interior of the polygon, I'll select the picture itself, and then I'll go to the Edit menu and I'll choose Crop. So what Sketchpad has done is take that portion of the picture that overlaps the quadrilateral interior, and that's the portion that it's cropped. That's what we can still see, and everything that sits outside that quadrilateral is no longer visible to us. But what's really nice about this is that I can change the crop that I see just by dragging the vertices of my polygon. So doing this, I can choose which portion of my Eiffel Tower I want to still be able to see. So let's, I don't know, let's do something a little bit like that maybe. If we reflect this portion of the Eiffel Tower, will we get the Eiffel Tower we all know and love? Well, let's check it out. So I'm going to reflect this portion of the picture across this segment here, segment AB. And to do that, I will select the segment. I will go to Transform. And I chose Mark Mirror. So now that segment AB is marked as my line of reflection. And if I select this picture and reflect it, well, no, that doesn't look like the Eiffel Tower, but fear not, I can change which portion of this I am reflecting. And by adjusting my line of reflection, I can actually see that, yes, my Eiffel Tower does, when reflected, look like the real thing, so it's highly symmetric. So now let's imagine we want to explore symmetry in other objects, or why just limit it to objects? How about people? So if you want to explore this with a person, well, one thing you could do that would be really nice would be to get a picture of one of your students and put it on the computer and drag it into Sketchpad. Well, when we were making Sketchpad 5, we realized that sometimes you just want to be able to grab a picture, and you don't necessarily want to go on the internet to look for a picture because you don't know what you're going to find. So we thought, well, what if we provide you with some pictures that would be really handy to use? So if you go to the Help menu and choose Pictures, we get this picture gallery, and we have this whole collection of pictures available for you to use. So here, for example, in Transformations, we have these pictures available to you here. So maybe I'll choose one. So I'll pick her. And I'll simply drag this picture directly onto the picture of the Eiffel Tower itself. So from my web browser into Sketchpad. And watch what happens. Okay, let me adjust our mirror line. So here we see, without having to rebuild the construction, that we have this transformation, this reflection of this picture already done for us. And I can explore the symmetry in her face. And we can see that looks a little bit odd compared to what it started with. And this is reflecting one half of her face, the right side of her face, across the mirror line. If I want to change which half is reflected, I can simply drag my polygon so that it covers a different portion of the original face. And I don't know who this poor student is. I don't know if she's ever known what we've been doing to her face, but I apologize. This is really great fun to do with your own students. Another place where I found this really fun is to take letters of the alphabet where they're nice, big, and thick, and to crop the letter of the alphabet so you just see a portion of it, and then reflect that half of the letter across the mirror line, and then hide the mirror line. And the challenge then is to figure out which letter of the alphabet did I crop. So it's a nice way of being able to add a little puzzle-like element to this construction. So I will pause here and see if there are any questions.
Okay, and we had the question come up, can you plot a function and reflect it across the line y equals x? So I think probably thinking about inverse functions.
Right, this was a question that actually came up last night too, and we discovered by checking it out that if you plot a function and select it and try to reflect it or do any other transformation with it, that does not work. However, I should hedge my bets on that because something I should have checked is whether you can apply something we'll check out soon, a custom transformation to make that happen. I don't have the answer for that right now, but the simple answer is that does not work by plotting a function, going to transform, and choosing reflect.
Now, someone did point out that if you imported a picture of a function, you probably could reflect it. I think that's definitely true because you can reflect any image. It would
right.
then be a dynamic function. I do know that we have an activity that involves inverses, and I think there's probably a way to construct a sketch that will allow you to reflect. It's probably just not quite as simple as what you just showed. Okay, any other questions? Let's see. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I think you can move on.
Okay, that idea of taking a picture of the function and then using that to reflect, that's a great idea, by the way. So now I'm going to turn my attention to some new features with functions in Sketchpad 5, and we'll be looking at lines. And to create a line of the form y equals mx plus b, first I'm going to create a parameter. And a parameter is simply a number whose value you can change. So I'll go to our number menu, and I'll choose new parameter. And I'll give that parameter a name. I'll call it m, and I'll click OK. And this is something new for those of you who have used Sketchpad 4. You'll notice that when we get the parameter, it comes with this box around it, this edit box. Now previously in Sketchpad 4, if you wanted to change the value of a parameter, you usually had to actually double click on it and then type in the new value. That was a pain in the neck. Here you can simply go right into the edit box and change that value, and there you have the new value, m equals 3. For those of you, and I'll mention this at the end, who are using the iPad, there's an even simpler way to do this with the Sketchpad for iPad that just came out. You can use your finger to actually flick the value up and down, which is a really cool way of being able to change a parameter value. So here we have m, and I'd like to create an equation of a line. So let's graph a new function. And rather than call it f of x, let's use a new feature of Sketchpad 5, which allows me to call that y. And I'll now click m times x plus 5. So y equals mx plus 5, there's our line. If I change the value of m, it changes my line, so that's nice. But right now, every line goes through 5 as the y-intercept. Well, what if we'd like to change 5 to b, another value that we can change? Well, one way we could do it would be to create a new parameter. But I'm going to show you a different way to introduce another new feature of Sketchpad. What I'm going to do is draw a segment. I'll put a point on that segment. And then I'm going to go to the Measure menu, and I'm going to choose Measure Value of Point. So what is this? It says C on AB equals 62 hundredths. So what that has done is it's taken my segment and it's basically parameterized it from 0 to 1. So when C is all the way to the left at point A, it has a value of 0. And when it's all the way to the right at B, it's equal to 1. So for those of you who have used sliders in Sketchpad, this is basically a slider that goes from 0 to 1. So I could use this for the value of B, but I'd like my value of B to go a little bit beyond 0 to 1. I'd like it to go from, say, 0 to 10. So I'm going to choose Number and then the calculator. And I'm going to take this value and multiply it by 10. So what I've done is taken this value which goes from 0 to 1, and I've changed it to go from 0 all the way to 10. So that's going to be my B. But to make it B, I'd like to call it something other than this. I'd actually like to call it B. So I'll double click on it with my text tool. I'll change the label to B. Click OK. And so here I have B, and that does go from 0 to 10. And now I'll edit my equation. I'll double click on it. I'll delete the 5. I'll click on B, and I'll click OK. Now I have y equals mx plus b, and I can drag point C to change the value of b. So now I have a line that I have much more control over. Now, one other thing I might want to be thinking about is, well, how did this line change when I change the value of m? Well, I can change the value of m one at a time from 6 to 7 to 8 or to whatever value I choose. But when I do that, students have to be able to remember what it looked like before, what that line looked like. What if I want to be able to look at a whole range of values for m and see simultaneously what all those different lines look like? So that's something we can now do with Sketchpad 5. I'll select m, because that's the value I want to change, and I'll select the line, and then I'll choose Construct, Family of Functions, and what I have here is I have this whole family of functions for different values of m. It's showing me all the different lines for different m values, and I see that all of those lines have different slopes, but they all pass through this one point, the y-intercept, which is 1.8. And I could do something similar if I selected B and selected the line. I could, actually not B, if I selected point C in the line, I could see what happens for different values of B, and I could see that all of the lines would be parallel to each other with the same slope, but different y-intercepts. So I will pause here to see if there are any questions.
I do see a question. Oops, I scrolled down too far. Can you change the point on the x-axis that sets up the value 1 over to the 10? I think, were you asking about changing the scales, I think? Maybe. So maybe instead of adjusting your b value by multiplying it by 10, maybe adjusting the scale. I'm guessing that's what that question means. Instead of multiplying by 10 to get b, sort of adjust the scale of the graph instead.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. So, okay. And I think that is the only question so far about that.
Okay. So I just have a few minutes left, and I want to go through one more new feature before just wrapping things up and telling you what resources we have. And I'd like to show you a custom transformation in Sketchpad. And a custom transformation allows you to take any transformations you've made and combine them together. So what I'm going to show you here is a combination of a rotation and a dilation. So I have a point, and this is going to be the center, we'll call it point C, of my rotation as well as my dilation. I'll put a random point here, which I'll call point H, and I'll start by rotating H by this angle. So I marked the angle, and now I am going to rotate point H about point C by that angle, and that gives me point H prime. Now I'd like to dilate H prime toward point C by this amount here, this value of C on AB. So I will select this ratio, the scale factor, and I will mark it. And I will now select H prime, and I will dilate it by that amount. So here we have H double prime. So we started with H, we rotated it by DEF, and then we took H prime, and we dilated it by this value here, which right now is 55 hundredths. So we started with H, we ended with H prime. So I'd like to tell Sketchpad to make that into a new transformation. So I'll select the original point and my final point. That's all I need. I'll choose Define Custom Transform. And I'll call it Rotate and Shrink. Now that has been added to my Transform menu. I'll hide my points, I don't need those. But now I'd like to apply this to, say, a picture. So I'll go to Help, I'll choose Picture Gallery. What should I pick? Let's go back to Transformation, and I'll pick a flower. I'll drag that flower into Sketchpad. Let's make it a little bit smaller. And let's change this ratio. So here's the flower, and I'd like to rotate and dilate it. So I'll go to Transform. I'll choose Rotate and Shrink, so that applied my two-step transformation. If I make C a little closer to A, you'll see the shrink. And I'd like to apply this over and over again to see what I get. So I could select this picture again and choose Rotate and Shrink, or I could simply use the keyboard shortcut shown there. So I'll do that. And there I have my rotate and shrink applied many times, and I can change my angle of rotation and my amount of dilation. And I get what I could use as a pretty beautiful Hallmark card right here. So I can now take this transformation, this two-step transformation, and replace it with anything I want. In addition to being able to replace it with other pictures, one thing I didn't show you is that the marker tool is a super useful tool for just being able to write. You can use it to write, especially on the smart boards. They're great for being able to use them to add text to or draw things like an arrow to one of my constructions. I could use it to, for instance, create the star. Oops, I've made everything here into one big picture. I shouldn't do that. So I'll make a star. And then I'll select that star. I'll copy it. I'll select my original image, and I'll simply paste the star over that flower. And here I have my spiral of stars. So that is a very quick introduction to the custom transformation tool. Next week, if you happen to be in Scott Steckety's, or 2 weeks from now, his geometric functions webinar, you will see him apply a custom transformation that does a very interesting twist, which takes an image from the picture gallery and distorts it in a very fun and unusual way. So that's a little preview for those of you who will be going to his webinar. And I will briefly pause for any questions before I continue to our resources.
Well, we got a couple of way cools from the folks out there, and a couple of people did note that this construction was kind of complicated, and that, folks, was a really quick presentation, but we do have we'll have a video up on our website. You can pause, or as Andre sent out, we have directions for this in one of the tutorials in the Learning Center. So we're not expecting that you're going to retain every last step of this just from seeing it once. I certainly couldn't. I don't think we have any questions.
Right.
Daniel, I do have a solution to the inverse problem. If we have time at the end of the webinar, I can show it, but I want you to finish up first.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I apologize. That transformations was a little more rocky. It wasn't gentle, as I said the webinar would be, but I did want to show it. So in terms of resources, you will be getting a file which has this sketch, both the before and after version of it, where it shows you everything I built. And you'll also get an email which will allow you to go back to the webinar recording itself, so you can watch any portion that you want over again. I want to give a big plug, which I mentioned earlier, for Sketchpad Explorer for the iPad, which just came out a few weeks ago. And this is allowing you to download our new app, Sketchpad Explorer, onto your first or second generation iPad. And with that, you can open any sketch made in Sketchpad. This can be a sketch that you find in our Sketch Exchange, which I'll talk about in a second, or a sketch that you make yourself and then that you drag using iTunes onto your iPad. Sketchpad Explorer is free until September 1st, so grab it now. Even if you don't have Sketchpad, you can still download it into iTunes and have it ready for you. It's really, really cool. You can be using the multi-touch feature on the iPad to drag more than one object at the same time. And I think this is going to make a big difference in both students using Sketchpad at home and at school. So that's Sketchpad Explorer. Sketchpad Exchange is a website that we have where we post sketches that you can explore. We have a whole collection of sketches that are specifically iPad enabled. They'll work on both the regular Sketchpad and Sketchpad on the iPad. And we also have this exchange really so you can share your own sketches and participate in the community here where you can ask questions and talk with other Sketchpad enthusiasts. So we hope that's something you'll check out. Very quickly, the Dynamic Number project is a project that I'm working on along with Scott Steckety, and that looks at Sketchpad in grades 3 through 8, in particular relating to number and early algebra. If you click this link, you'll find a number of really interesting activities that cover everything from multiplication and factors to early algebra concepts. You can also click to find all our old archived webinars and watch those. And finally, that webinar that I keep plugging from Scott, that's coming up on August 30th and 31st. And as Elizabeth mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we have Tech Tuesday webinars where we focus on either Fathom, Tinkerplots, or Sketchpad. So, phew, there, I think that covers it. And I will turn it back over to you, Elizabeth.
I had myself on mute. So we had the question, can you store the Sketchpad Explorer in your iTunes until you get the iPad? Yes, you can. So it's free until September 1st, and then it's inexpensive after that, so don't worry. But you can store it in iTunes until you get an iPad. I just got one. It's very exciting and fun. Okay, so those of you who are curious about graphing an inverse, if you want to stick around for just one minute, I'll show you one method that I just reminded myself of. I think I have to make myself a presenter, so I'm going to go ahead and grab control here. Before I do that, though, thank you so much, Daniel. That was a fantastic webinar, and we're getting a lot of great comments from people. So thank you for that. And hopefully you guys can see my screen now. I'm going to do a define coordinate system. And in order to reflect a line, reflect a function across a line y equals x, I actually need to construct the line y equals x. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot the point 1, 1, and then I'm just going to grab my line tool and construct a line that goes through the origin and 1, 1. And I happen to know that that is the line y equals x. I'm going to graph a function. I'm going to, oh, my objects keep on coming up on my other monitor. I'm going to graph the function to the x, graph an exponential function there. And you can see it come up with the equation. And then I'm going to plot a point on this function just by clicking on the point tool and clicking on the function. Now what I can do, I can't reflect the function, but I can reflect that point. So I'm going to mark my y equals x line as a mirror, select that point, and reflect it. Now you can see that as I move the point on the function, the reflection also moves, and I can actually do two things. I could trace that reflected point, and then what you're going to see is a trace of the inverse, not necessarily an inverse function, but an inverse relation. And then if I really want to see all possible locations for that point, I can select that point and the driver point and choose construct locus, and I will get a plot of that inverse relation. So that's my quick method, quick method for you all. So so that's it. And again, thanks so much, Daniel, and thanks, Andres, for answering questions in the background. And thanks to all of you for attending. I know it's the beginning of the school year, busy, busy time, so we really appreciate you taking the time to come. All right, please include it in the zip file. Sure, we can I think we can include it in the zip file or in a separate email. All righty. Okay, so we're going to shut down now, and we hope to see you guys all in a few weeks at the next webinar. Okay, bye-bye.